Well, let me ask you a question. So if someone wants to dance, can they just feel it and then go out and do it? Or is there some technique that can bring about a better result?
Well, social dancing, sure. If you're in a club, you can just feel it and move.
Yeah.
But if you're going to do technical dancing, that's definitely an element. You need the technique. But then in some ways, I'll talk about letting the technique go, because you don't want to be so stuck on exactly what you're supposed to do that there's no breath in it. I don't know if that's similar with...
The technique is the means.
Yeah.
And it's a track over which the talented person finds his voice, or her voice. And
you can't be so stuck in it.
Yes, and without it, you can't find your voice. And I see you have told me that when I started showing you how to move better, that it opened up your ideas. That you got,
that's true.
That he got a wider range of what he could improvise.
And avoided injury probably because you know, I'm sure you
there's lots of lots of musical injuries. Do you deal with that sometimes?
Yeah. I have in the past.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about what your opinion is of injuries and repetitive stress for computer typists.
Well, you know, obviously with pianists it's the arms, and I think that when people have problems with it, they, especially numbness or any functional, they look to the neck, but there's other areas of influence, you know, to that. So I think that it's looked on very, you know, very myopically.
So Western medicine misses a few points sometimes.
Yeah, when I look at a dysfunction of an area, I'm looking in the balance of the joints, which is proprioception, the vascularity, the neurovascular, and the neurology, and all that is in a large context that's guided by principles of which all really originate from the gravitational center, which comes back to what you're saying, is that everything depends upon your relationship to interact with the gravitational forces would affect the function of that area. With pianists, though, you know, because they get very flexor dominant.
Well,
that's because it controls the proprioceptive to the lumbrical.
Yes.
Function.
What you do, you see, is you move from here, and this is a secondary motion inside this bigger one, and you get this gorgeous line. I mean, I have heard Yale graduate students, I would be all over, not just there, when asked by a lecturer who did know something about it, how many joints the thumb has, they say 2. Countless musicians would say 2. That only goes in and out. And when I was young, you were taught to pull, say, in a straight line, the old German system, the keys are flat, so you keep the fingers flat, and no, it's from here. So the thumb, and even Bach, Johann Sebastian, his son wrote that the thumb, you know, in the Renaissance, up until about almost 1700, the thumb was allowed to dangle. They didn't even use it. You played with the 4 fingers. It was as though they didn't even know what a wonderful versatile thing. And Carl Philipp wrote that his father had raised the thumb to the principal finger of the hand. Counterpoint of a Bach fugue is impossible without a thumb. So those guys, I think, had such strong feelings about music and sound and what they wanted to do that they found a way. It's all integrated. So I'm very interested by what you say. And
do you have any advice?
Well, there was a good old boy osteopath who they used to call, they called him Bear. And he says, here's a bear dropping for you. He says, if the cat's tail is caught in the door, which end do you treat? Is that where your symptoms are may not be the origin.
Good point.
And that I think that's a keystone to a lot of problems in Western medicine, that the context is much larger.
Absolutely.
And especially with the arms and the hands, because of the relationship to major systems in the body through the fascial planes. The heart, the large intestine, the lungs. Stress is either biomechanical, psycho-emotional or chemical or a combination of both. So he's working with memory as related to a stimulation of the stress nervous system, which affects everything. And that is true with some people, but it's a cumulative effect. And some people blame everything on emotion. They say, I get emotionally upset and the left side of my neck hurts. And I would say, well, that's a systemic response. Why is it the left side of your neck? So a lot of stress is based on, too much is based, at least the clients that I see, on psycho-emotional. They become traumatized by that because the biomechanical relationships to stress haven't been identified. They can't be visualized on X-ray or anything because they're a cumulative effect.
That's what I was saying, yeah.
And a cumulative effect upon the balance of your central nervous system. So to say that something's just soft tissue is, from my point of view, lacking, a greater understanding. And in fact, they say, what holds up the spine? Is it the, like a tent? Is it the tent pole or the guide wire?
Yeah. That's a good point.
Definitely.
Well, and I grew up doing Ukrainian dancing, which is very, stressful, and it's hard work on the knees, let's say, for guys, and there's all kinds of Cossack moves and jumps and things. But I did notice later, many years later, when I would go to the dance floor, like at a wedding or a casual social event, that I couldn't really, there's a stiffness maybe in the upper body that comes from some of those Northern European cultures. It's still awesome stuff and great dancing, but it's just interesting how when I came to Burton, part of the problem was that I was holding things. I was carrying my shoulders around.
It took a
and
long
there was a lot of
time
stiffness
to get him to realize that. And he said to me, and I was so very startled by this, I thought, he said, that if I didn't hold my shoulders up, they wouldn't stay on. That's the exact
Maybe it's a cultural emotional thing. I know everyone has trauma, and I've had things in my life.
I remember reading a New York Times article about how memory and trauma can actually be passed down kind of genetically to the next generation, actually kind of in the body, not just kind of learned, but actually, that you
Well, it
can
brings to
actually...
mind this scientist named Rupert Sheldrake, who talks about morphogenic fields and the idea that if it's done long enough, other people start to spontaneously do it. I find, I like to watch Chinese people walk, and they have a certain gait.
Yes.
And it's sort of, especially with the legs, the business of movement of this.
Like a caterpillar.
Yeah, and as you were talking that, I wonder where the concept about tight asses came from. Whether that's a cultural, whether we, but the idea that other cultures squat, other cultures elongate the tissues that attach into the gravitational center that controls the ability of the whole system to move freer. So as a culture, we don't squat. In fact, we sit on the coccyx, which is the direct leverage on the whole system, to facilitate tightening.
And do you think that that affects the brain if you're constantly in a squat position or you're sitting, that there's some type of effect that's kind of changes how your brain is working by how your body's moving every day?
Certainly, because the fascial planes mediate tension on the blood flow. Of course, the Chinese say that if too much qi goes to the head, the water organs cook.
Yeah.
And the treatment for high blood pressure is to get your qi or your energy down to your gravitational centers. So there's a functional reason for this, is viewed through the balance of the autonomic nervous system, which is balanced by the balance and tensegrity of the fascial planes, which is our feedback system to know how to move.